Let's start today's video with words from Securities and Exchange Commission's Chairman Gary Gensler's statement on the settlement that the SEC and Boeing just agreed to last week. He said, in times of crisis and tragedy, it is especially important that public companies and executives provide full, fair, and truthful disclosures to the markets. He went on to say that the Boeing company and its former CEO Dennis Muilenburg failed in this most basic obligation. He said they misled investors by providing assurances about the safety of the 737 MAX, despite knowing about the serious safety concerns. While that statement was indeed true, I could have said exactly what he said using only 5 words to do it. Boeing lied and people died. But this most recent SEC judgment isn't about the Boeing MAX crashes that killed 346 people. It's about Boeing's stock crashing and killing their shareholders' investments and not their families. That's next on Maximus. Greetings everybody, Maximus here. Well, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, finally finished their 3-year-long investigation and charged Boeing and former CEO Dennis Muilenburg with making materially misleading public statements following the crashes of 2 Boeing MAX jets in 2018 and 2019. And as the world subsequently found out, both crashes were the result of Boeing's new MCAS flight control software. The SEC charged that after the first crash, Boeing and Muilenburg were well aware that MCAS was dangerous and potentially deadly, but still continued to lie to the public that the 737 MAX was, quote, as safe as any airplane that has ever flown the skies. However, later following the second crash, Boeing and Muilenburg assured the public that there were no slips or gaps in the certification process regarding its new MCAS system. But the world found out Boeing and Muilenburg were outright lying, because they were well aware that Mark Forkner was traveling the world Jedi mind-tricking aviation regulators into certifying the fatally flawed plane. But according to the SEC's charge, 1 month after the Lion Air crash in October of 2018, Boeing issued a press release that was heavily edited and personally approved by then CEO Muilenburg. And in that heavily edited press release, Boeing selectively highlighted certain facts from an official report from the Indonesian government, suggesting that pilot error was the cause of the crash, specifically uneducated Indonesian pilots. So Muilenburg basically stated that stupid, inferior pilots and poor aircraft maintenance caused the crashes, not Boeing. Yet at the same time, Boeing knew for a fact that the MCAS was dangerous. The Boeing press release also gave assurances of the airplane's safety, however failing to disclose that an internal safety review had determined that MCAS posed an ongoing airplane safety issue, and that Boeing had already begun redesigning MCAS right after the first 2018 Lion Air MAX crash. Then approximately 6 weeks after the March 2019 Ethiopian crash and the grounding of the entire 737 MAX fleet, Muilenburg knew the FAA launched their own investigation because they found out that Boeing had been lying to them about the MAX's design problems, and yet Muilenburg lied to analysts and reporters, assuring them there were no surprises or gaps that somehow slipped through the certification process for the MAX, and that Boeing had gone back and doubled down again that we followed exactly the steps in our design and certification process that consistently produce safe airplanes. Just talking about this Muilenburg guy, I feel like I need a shower. Jabir S. Jerwal, director of the SEC's Enforcement Division, said, Boeing and Muilenburg put profits over people by misleading investors about the safety of the 737 MAX, all in an effort to rehabilitate Boeing's image following the 2 MAX accidents that resulted in the loss of 346 lives and incalculable grief for so many families. But public companies and their executives must provide accurate and complete information when they make disclosures to investors, no matter the circumstances. When they don't, we at the SEC will hold them accountable, as we did here. The SEC's orders against Boeing and Muilenburg found that they negligently violated the anti-fraud provisions of federal securities laws, But yet again, Boeing still got off easy because without admitting or denying the SEC's findings, Boeing and Muhlenberg consented to cease and desist orders that included penalties of $200 million for Boeing and $1 million for Muhlenberg personally. Okay, so those are some of the highlights from the SEC's findings. But I still can't believe not one of these slimy greaseball Boeing executives have gone to prison for all the individual parts they played in this whole horrific mess. Dennis Muhlenberg especially. Because he hid all this information from the public, knowing full well the MAX was a dangerous killing machine. So in the end, what was his punishment? The SEC fines him $1 million. But when Boeing fired Muhlenberg, they paid him $60 million just to go away. Let that sink in for a minute. They fired Dennis Muhlenberg and paid him $60 million in the process. So if you do the math, 60 million divided by 346 victims, that comes out to about $175,000 per victim. So Boeing basically paid Muhlenberg $175,000 per crash victim to walk away. Talk about a golden parachute. Too bad nobody on the 2 Boeing MAX planes had any parachutes. Okay, so now the SEC has made their judgment and has ordered Boeing to pay $200 million and Muhlenberg has to pay $1 million, which is pocket change to him. But who gets that fine money the SEC collected? Well, prior to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, the answer would have been that the U.S. government Treasury would get all and any fines collected. Well, if you're not familiar with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, it was enacted as a reaction to a number of major corporate and accounting scandals, including Enron, Tyco International, and WorldCom, just to name a few. These scandals cost investors billions of dollars when the share prices of affected companies collapsed and shook public confidence in the U.S. securities markets, but because of Sarbanes-Oxley, this most recent Boeing fine and most fines are placed in what's called a fair fund for the benefit of harmed investors so they can be made whole. But like I said before the 2002 Act, all fines and penalties went to the U.S. Treasury. But as you can imagine, the victims' families are also outraged that once again Boeing and its bosses got off the hook yet again. Some family members who lost their relatives in the 2018 Lion Air crash said, "The latest financial penalties did little to hold those responsible to account. While family members don't think Boeing intentionally wanted to hurt anyone, they said Boeing should be held accountable just the same." Bias Ramadan, who lost his mother in the Lion Air crash, said, "Until now, no one has faced any criminal sanctions in America." He said it's simple, the parties responsible for the crash should be in jail. They shouldn't walk free just because they paid some fines. But of the SEC settlement, Bias said it was just what he expected from Boeing, and that Boeing only cares about pandering to its shareholders. And finally, Bias said over 300 people died in the crashes and not a single person has faced a criminal punishment. He said it's just messed up. So what do you think about the latest Boeing slap on the wrist by the SEC? Let me know down below. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Law & Order Boeing Edition. Thank you so much for stopping by, and don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and ring the bell. And remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.